skip to this timestamp to hear me talk about the tank specifically. But you know what? Left 4 Dead 2 is the perfect game. Yeah, that's right, it's perfect. I don't want to hear you say that the story isn't spectacular, or that respawn clauses aren't realistic, or that the melee weapon hitboxes are bugged, or that the jockey is bugged, or that Metacritic only gave it a measly 89%, because who cares? The game's perfect. Valve aimed for a formula of replayability and executed it to perfection, with players still enjoying it after 15 years, a thriving workshop community, and to this day, if you tell someone you played Left 4 Dead, you earn their respect. Left 4 Dead has won the streets, and while barely being touched after all this time, it's safe to say that the game is perfect. But that being said, we did have the Last Stand update a few years ago, which showed that there's still some things that can be done within the game's pre-established framework, which could freshen things up. And after some time on this channel, a common question I get asked is what I would like to see in an update or a Left 4 Dead 3. What would I change? What would I add? Remove? Well, it turns out I have a lot of ideas on this to fill out a video, so let us discuss what a good theoretical update to the Left 4 Dead franchise could be. And a disclaimer, for as much of this video, I am going to try to use my stream clips to subconsciously persuade you into checking out the streams we have on this channel, and if you subscribe, you'll know when those happen. Alright, thanks. And the other disclaimer is Left 4 Dead's in-game execution is already so good that if too many changes were to be made, it could potentially not feel like Left 4 Dead anymore, and then that wouldn't be very cool. But also, it's worth pointing out that there are already slight variations in the game depending on if you are playing campaign versus or survival. So one change could benefit, for example, campaign, but not versus or survival. And I'll specify this when I can. I want to touch on the only thing I disliked from the Last Stand update, and it was the implementation of the Scout and Op. In general, I'm in favor of new weapons to the game. The MP5 is slightly different than the other SMGs, boasting a better effectiveness at medium range, while the other SMGs are better at shorter range, and the Krieg plays different than the other assault rifle with the added scope. Therefore, these weapons have their own unique place in the game without feeling like an effective replacement to any other weapon. The problem, however, is that the Scout and Op do not have this. Instead, both weapons are very slow rate of fire, and it's hard to justify picking up either one when there are other weapons available, unless you feel like doing something different or to challenge yourself. There are still slight variations, mainly the Scout shoots faster with slightly less damage per shot, but the reload speed between each shot is such a bad handicap on either gun that why would you normally want to pick up either weapon? There's no clear role or strength that these weapons have over the hunting and military sniper or each other, so a change needs to be made to make their identities more clear. To address this, I would have the Scout be treated on the same level as the pump shotguns and SMGs, a tier 1 weapon, and I would actually have the Scout spawn in most campaign beginnings or any safe house that has tier 1 weapons. But I would make it a single Scout spawn, not an infinite Scout spawn.
Dude, headshots are so hard.
This means that off the bat, a team can run with a 3-layered team comp if they really wanted to, but also to reinforce that the Scout is in fact a tier 1 weapon despite being a sniper. I know there are other ramifications with the actual distance a sniper can manage for your team either way, especially in a game mode like Versus. It might not be a welcome addition in a game mode that's already pretty survivor favored, so I'd make this change to be just a campaign only thing. But beyond that, I simply would just have the Scout spawn less frequently, so it only spawns where tier 1 weapons spawn, because right now I also see the Scout spawn where an auto shotgun or hunting rifle might spawn otherwise, and it just feels kind of silly. And then for the Op, I'd adjust this to be an auxiliary weapon like the M60 or grenade launcher. The Op is such a powerful, high-impact weapon in Counter-Strike, which immediately commands respect once it's on the map, but in Left 4 Dead, it feels more like a noob trap. Since snipers are the king at picking off certain special infected from range, let's let this auxiliary Op lean into that, and let's make its damage match the powerful bang it gives off with each shot. Let's reduce the fire rate, but crank up that damage so that it's strong enough to one-shot a charger with a headshot. And let's give it maybe 5 to 10 shots which can't be replenished. If an M60 is good all around, and a grenade launcher is great for hordes, then let's make an auxiliary weapon that specializes in special infected takedowns. Obviously, I'd probably not have this in Versus either. And for all the Counter-Strike ported weapons, let's update their base models to actually look like they fit in with the game, because it's kind of silly that I need to rely on the Steam Workshop for this and replace the in-game models with Counter-Strike Global Offensive ones. And a weapon I'd also like to change a bit is the Scar. It's cool that the Scar has its burst fire mode, but I think that being locked into that burst fire mode deters a lot of players and immediately raises the question of explosive bullets, because the gun can already be such a friendly fire machine anyways. I would simply adjust the Scar to make its burst fire optional. Let's make it behave similar to the Krieg, where if you decide to middle mouse to zoom in a bit, it can actually shoot just one bullet at a time at a semi-auto rate, yet slow rate of fire. This would leave the gun unchanged for most of the encounters, but you can still use the gun more efficiently for picking off single infected in a room. In general, the primary weapons in Left 4 Dead are already fantastic, so if we were to add more primary weapons, there could be a problem of having multiple weapons that effectively play the same way with no discernible difference between the two. You could argue that this is already the case with the 2 pump and auto shotguns, or between the Uzi and silenced SMG, And if we added more, let's say, assault rifles or snipers, then that could be a problem the game faces too. There could be another question of would this weapon make sense to feasibly come across in the Left 4 Dead universe, so it could maybe be a campaign-specific thing, but overall, I personally wouldn't be against more weapons to shoot around with. And we've now got ops spawning in the world more often, and the SCAR, which, in my opinion, breaks that believable factor anyways. But the question arises, would these genuinely be problems if we added more guns? Personally, I think while there's potential to go overboard with this, I'd welcome it. I wouldn't mind occasionally picking up something like an MP7 or a Vector for SMGs, or an AA-12 as a shotgun, or a G36 L8 or FAMAS as an assault rifle. If we make the SCAR have the options between burst and single, then maybe the FAMAS could be the purely burst fire weapon, or we make the FAMAS the one that can alternate between the two. This would raise a particular problem where if someone is really attached to wanting the same weapon in every game, then they would see it less, but personally, I wouldn't mind it. It would be cool if there was a bit of a tier of weapons between 1 and 2, like perhaps an assault rifle that is accurate for one task but has the world's worst spray to compensate. And at the end of the day, I simply approach this game from the perspective of just wanting to hop in there and shoot zombies. So while it's cool there's a bit of a lore there to set up the context in which you shoot the zombies, the believability and immersion takes a backseat to the gameplay enjoyment I get out of picking up a weapon and firing into a horde. And as it stands right now, while the weapons are already great and expansive, there are still other weapon types and play patterns that aren't currently in the game, which could be expanded upon and is something that I'd enjoy personally. But enough about the primary weapons, what about the secondaries? So right now, there's a great abundance of melee weapons. I'm Canadian, so we should add a hockey stick as a melee weapon. There's no real rhyme or reason to it, I just want to smack zombies with a hockey stick. And while we're at it, we can try to update the hit registration of a lot of the melee weapons. I don't know how much of it is a ping problem or a server tick problem or a hitbox problem, but at the end of the day, some melee weapons have some consistency issues, and if that could be improved even marginally, that would be great. But enough about melee weapons, there's next to nothing to speak about for the pistols right now. We've got the single pistol, the dual pistols, and the Desert Eagle. And the Desert Eagle is in such a class of its own. I would first want to try to buff the dual pistols, in campaign at least, and probably in survival, but not so much versus. I think the dualies are already fine enough as they are while you are standing up, but other than less reloads while incapped, they're still not really that fantastic once you're down there. Meanwhile, the Deagle is just as effective and accurate while incapped as you are when standing up. So let's buff the dualies so that when incapped, they have a slightly higher rate of fire, or to be more accurate. Because right now, choosing dualies over the Desert Eagle feels like choosing a scout or op over any of the other snipers. You just do it because you really want to. This would still very much make the Desert Eagle the king of secondary pistols, but it can make the dualies feel a bit more viable as an option that you can so feasibly use and be impactful with while you are incapped. This would have obvious ramifications in versus, so I wouldn't apply it there. You could argue it could have a more noticeable ripple effect in expert campaign as well to make the game mode overall easier. However, I come from a perspective that a lot of this player base can already consistently beat expert with the current dual pistols anyways. All it would do is make the game mode a bit more accessible to newer players. But I also have other suggestions further on that can make things harder, so just as a flat idea, an in-cap buff to the standard dual pistols. But I wouldn't stop there because there's room for more secondary variety here. You can have a pistol with a burst fire option, you can have a full auto pistol like a CZ or a Scorpion, a very short range double barrel shotgun or a revolver. They can be balanced so that the auto pistol is effective on hordes very close range and while incapped, but make them inaccurate so that they're unreliable for picking off specials while in that state. Meanwhile, a revolver can be just like the Desert Eagle and maybe even a bit more accurate, but just have a much slower fire rate. So when incapped, its role is vice versa to that of the Scorpion and the CZ. Then a burst pistol can be a single held item, and it can be a bit more of a balance between the two. We need more secondary pew-pews, and it'll help freshen things up a bit, especially if we are trying to bring up the topic of weapon believability anyways. I feel like in a real apocalypse scenario, I'd come across a higher variety of pistols than any other weapon. Across the board, I'd also remodel all the pistols. They just look blocky and unpleasant compared to a lot of the workshop mods people have out there. The standard pistols especially are a downgrade from the first Left 4 Dead game. There's a reason one of my core workshop mods is replacing the standard pistols with the Left 4 Dead 1 models. Maybe if we brought back these cult pistols to be the standard pistols, then we could make the Glock one be a burst fire. Now, this idea may not end up having a place in Left 4 Dead at all, but in the same way we have temporary auxiliary weapons like the M60 grenade launcher and chainsaw, what if there was a temporary secondary weapon that shoots? I'm thinking maybe there can be a chance for a one-shot or maybe a three-shot secondary weapon that is a tranquilizer gun. It doesn't kill, but temporarily slows down and sleeps special infected before it pops back out and they become enraged again. This could be an interesting way to cancel special infected that are on your teammates, or a way to temporarily get around a witch or aid in a tank fight. The sleep on special infected could be very short-lived, like maybe 1 or 2 seconds, but 1 or 2 seconds can make all the difference in the world in clutch situations. And then after those shots are up, you would return back to the default pistol. or to whatever secondary weapon you already had, but from a coding standpoint, probably default pistol. And it would require new animations for everyone, but we're just brainstorming here. It could also be a cool way to pin down a survivor zombie so that it doesn't run away. But I also feel like the implementation of a sleep dart would just be adding a new mechanic and then be an extra thing to learn, and Left 4 Dead is heralded for its simplicity and low skill floor. I would not change a single thing about the throwables in Left 4 Dead. At most, maybe a basic frag grenade, which would be a downgraded pipe bomb, but as it stands now, the trifecta of throwables in this game are perfect, and I don't see anything wrong with what we've currently got going on. Even the implementation of a flashbang makes me hesitant and think, no, let's not do that. I mean, the basic frag grenade could perhaps have a stumbling effect on some specials on top of one-shotting whatever commons are near it, but we can maybe just take a look at the in-game health economy a bit further instead. In slot 4, there's just the first aid kit and the defib, which of course are two very different items on two different ends of the spectrum. So let's theorycraft what more we could add here. I think one of the most obvious ones would be like in Fortnite, what if instead of the first aid kit, you sometimes came across a little pack of gauze? And then the numbers of course could be finessed, but what if the gauze came with anywhere between 2 to 5 charges, with each charge granting around 10 to 15 permanent health? Or in the same way that the first aid kits have a healing ratio of 80% of your max HP based on how much permanent health you already have, it behaves similarly to be about 10, 12, or 15%, and these gauzes would have no effect on a player's black and white status either. A potential problem that can arise here is that this item could maybe make it a bit too easy to keep as many teammates as possible over the 40 health benchmark, whereas a medkit forces teams to have to commit that big chunk of health to one person. It would also feel like much less of a commitment to already have a medkit and decent health, to just pick up that gauze and bump everyone's health up a bit, and then re-pick up your medkit. This could also have ramifications on game flow and horde spawn timers. So if such a thing were to be implemented, I feel like it would have to be a rarer thing, and the game director would have to really pick its moments to throw it in situations where teammates would be happy to pick it up and distribute it without interrupting game flow. As for defibs, this would be a controversial one. So right now the defib is in a bit of a funky spot. It absolutely serves a purpose in the role of health economy and decision making. What may or may not have been intended with the defibs is if people use it as a medkit. Now, I have a whole video where we analyze the game's health economy and the when and wheres of when you should use the defib as a medkit, but I wouldn't be completely against the defib having some sort of penalty if the target being revived died due to friendly fire. On one hand, it would incentivize players to strictly use the defibs on teammates that have legitimately died, but on the other hand, that would be something that players don't learn unless they try it themselves, which has its own set of problems. Not to mention, this doesn't cover accidental incidents, and it's like, how can the game truly know? And things being plopped into the game and then the players deciding what they do with said items is in the spirit of the game. And also, is killing teammates to defib them as de facto medkits even a problem that is worth addressing? I don't think so. This point is also just kind of floating an idea out there, but it would be neat if there were occasionally little pieces of armor like a helmet, vest, or shin pads you could pick up, which would not affect if you're limping or not, but provide about 10 to 30 permanent health. There would be a huge problem with visibility, I think, and it would have to be an instant thing, and there genuinely isn't a problem with Left 4 Dead's health economy as a whole, so this would probably be seen as unnecessary and too much to the game. When the game is supposed to be easily accessible and simple, perhaps this would be specific to a new campaign where you briefly stop by a police station to gear up, or the riot infected have a 10% chance to drop one. So that would be the same problem with the new slot 5 item alongside pills and adrenaline that actually gave you more permanent health over time. Like, let's say you pick up some, morphine or disinfectant or something. You take it and you gain 20 to 30 permanent health over the course of a minute. Not a terrible idea in my opinion, and could flavor the game's health economy a bit, because it's not the most reliable form of healing, and it's also not something that will instantly benefit you in a pinch. But this would also have a problem of game flow where it would make sense to just pick it up and consume it the second you see it most of the time without having to think about it at all. So that's everything I can think of for items. I don't think that this game would benefit from going around looking for weapon upgrades outside of the laser sights we already have. I'm not here for attaching scopes or an abundance of aim down sights or things like foregrips and magazine upgrades. It's something that turned me away from Back 4 Blood, for example. I don't think it's a bad idea in a vacuum. I loved it in PUBG. It's just not something that I would apply to Left 4 Dead. And outside of weapons, the actual gameplay of Left 4 Dead 2 is fantastic, but what the Last Stand update did was implement 2 unique types of holdouts. Chapter 1, where you hold out, but then you have to move to turn on generators, and then again to move the crane. And then the Chapter 2 finale, where it blends holding out and scavenge portions. Future maps could incorporate these more dynamic events more often, where sometimes you run, sometimes you scavenge, sometimes you hold out, sometimes you do any combination of the 3. Maybe in some points you need to run one way and then back the other while a horde is attacking. Maybe pre-existing maps get updated, like for example in Dead Air Chapter 2 or 3, what if there was at some point you had to stop holding out to begin running to look for gas cans to scavenge to continue operating the crane, or to continue burning down the construction barricade? I think Left 4 Dead would benefit from having a slight increase in these types of hybrid horde events. and I think future campaigns, if any, should definitely incorporate them. If possible, I would like to see a bit more variety in map pathing. Specifically like in Dead Center 3, sometimes it forces you to turn left and other times it forces you to turn right before the running event. If there was slightly more variation in which way you'd have to go for some chapters, it can freshen things up a bit. Like in No Mercy Chapter 1, there's actually like that big warehouse area, but there's never any real reason to go over there. People opt to just go down the street and straight into the subway. If there were sometimes a big police barricade or something to force the survivors to have to walk all the way around, for example, that'd be neat. There are a lot of little niche corners or areas of the maps that the game could try to suggest you go into. But I'd be careful with this because one of the game's strengths is that there's just a map in front of you and then you can choose to explore it in any which way you feel. Or maybe some maps can be updated with breakable things. For example, what if to go through certain doors you just had to first break your way through a bunch of breakable boxes or wooden planks? This would of course have ramifications on horde and special infected flanks, but it is just an idea. I would also personally like to be able to see a bit more customization with lobbies. Anyone that's played Phasmophobia or golf with your friends knows there are preset game modes or difficulties, and it just shows you which variables are adjusted and where. For example, in golf, you can adjust how many strokes per level, how much time per level. You can toggle collision mode off or on. In Phasmophobia, you can finesse how the ghost behaves, your starting health, and just so much more. Way more variables than Left 4 Dead would ever need. But for example, you could select an expert difficulty preset, but then fine-tune some numbers so that there's more or less ammo spawns, more or less damage per infected hit, friendly fire, witch or tank health, horde spawn frequencies. It could go on. There would be a ripple effect problem perhaps of how this would go into just finding standard public lobbies. A lot of the time when someone tries a game, whether or not they're going to keep playing that game is decided by them pretty early on, and sometimes that is dependent on how much information is being presented to them. And show me one person that has cited information overload as their reason for dropping Left 4 Dead of all games. So perhaps it is best that these types of sliders and adjustments are reserved for third-party dedicated servers. If there was a way to streamline this a bit more into the vanilla game, I would personally welcome that. And then if it were its own mutation, it could make it easier to just be able to get into a game with friends and decide, okay, it's campaign mode, but there's no respawn closets. Or it's realism and there are respawn closets. Or it's campaign, but without player and item outlines. Or vanilla gameplay, but there are no bots, just however many humans happen to be in the lobby with the director behaving accordingly. It's a lot to consider, and I don't have a coding degree, and if you were to make these lobbies public, then there might have to be a whole separate, server browser or something where you can filter adjustments, and that's just a lot to ask of Valve employees who would probably rather be working on new exciting things like Deadlock or Counter-Strike updates, or definitely a new Half-Life game, or Ricochet 2. For campaign, the next idea is something that I don't think I'd ever see officially implemented because Left 4 Dead was not designed with this in mind, and this is already possible with custom dedicated servers. However, it would be cool to be able to just have custom campaign lobbies that allow more than 4 people into a campaign. Sometimes you just have more than 4 friends online and suddenly Left 4 Dead isn't as straightforward as a game to play together. If there was some sort of way to be able to fit up to 8 survivors in a friends only lobby, and if that lobby was then able to modify itself based in terms of throwable health infected spawns based on how many people are joining, then that would be pretty cool. And something that I'd like to see to make things a bit more difficult, because I know a lot of us are at a point where we consistently beat expert, but I wouldn't mind seeing 2 tanks per chapter sometimes, especially in chapters like Blood Harvest Chapter 2. It could sometimes be 2 tanks at once. Other times it could be 2 tanks at 2 different points in the chapter, and or you can buff tanks so that they have some damage resistance based on how many survivors are around and or shooting at them. Because right now it feels like even on expert, if everyone's focusing down a tank, it's too easy. Of course, teamwork should be rewarded and make it easier to focus down a tank. Right now, while soloing a tank is pretty thrilling, right now when a whole team focuses the tank, the moment just passes by way too quickly for my liking. These are more or less supposed to be the bosses of each campaign, and right now they're a little easy. I'd apply this to versus in campaign, but not to survival. And sometimes we do see 2 witches in a chapter, but also how about the occasional cluster of about 2 to 3 witches in close proximity? It's certainly a tedious thing to balance. The last thing anyone wants is to be in an awkward position as it is, only for the game director to checkmate them with 3 witches and a mandatory choke point with only an assault rifle and pipe bomb. But overall, I am saying that, especially for the demographic of players that are already able to breeze by expert in a lot of sittings with minimal problems, these sorts of additions could inject a bit of extra life into the game.
Whoops.
For versus, I definitely revisit that so it isn't typically so survivor-sided on most maps. Like, less or no snipers and tier 1 weapons for the most part. I don't have anything else to add on to that. I'm not a versus connoisseur and haven't put in nearly enough hours to comment, but that's what the comment section is for, baby. So what would you guys do to change versus? For survival, I'd make it easier to juggle items or designate where you're going to hold out and have all the gas cans teleport there anyways, like the gold miner servers do, because some maps like Dead Center Atrium, it's like more time gathering materials than actually holding out sometimes, which certainly isn't a gameplay loop that I think anyone wants to find themselves in. But I am also not a survival connoisseur just yet. As I make this video, I'm still streaming my progress to getting a gold medal on every survival map. But hey, on top of survival, you know what else I think would be really cool for Valve to implement? Some sort of sandbox mode where you can do something like build forts. In Left 4 Dead 1, it's easy to just host a local server with friends and then turn on SV cheats 1 and then build forts or mess around in one way or another. I don't know if there's security reasons or anything that restricts Left 4 Dead 2 from doing this, but I'd love for it to be that simple without having to do port forwarding stuff with Hamachi. I have a whole video where I break down how to build forts, but I think Left 4 Dead would benefit from having a more streamlined option to do that. But again, I recognize already that there are already third-party survival servers that enable this, and there would probably be a huge pain point of time investment versus reward for anyone at Valve that would actually be putting in time to creating that. And now, here are the final things that I would personally put into the game if I were suddenly promoted to Valve's Left 4 Dead 2 Changer Maker. Of course, a separate Source 2 game entity just to see what it's like. No workshop right off the bat, just vanilla. Right now, if Left 4 Dead were to go over to Source 2, it would break the entire Steam workshop. And I see there could be a potential problem with splitting up a player base between Left 4 Dead 2 and a Left for Source 2. I'd add a difficulty between Advanced and Expert. Apparently this was intended at some point, but didn't make the cut for one reason or another. I'd personally never play it, but when you just see how big of a jump it is between Advanced to Expert, it just feels like it makes sense. There could be a practicality concern with it too. I'd update the left side kill feed so that it shows multiple special infected getting slain and not just the most recent one. If I or a teammate get a multi-kill, I want to be able to see that. I definitely adjust the jockey lunge hitbox. A new uncommon infected that has a tank on their back, maybe like firefighters, and then shooting that tank makes them go boom, for better or for worse. I'd upgrade the in-game voice chat to some degree. I understand there's processing into it. In-game, if there's a storm, it feels like it swallows the mics of your teammates to increase that isolation you feel, or sometimes it will quiet down other parts of the game so that you can hear your friends better, but the actual mic quality in-game just does not sound good, and it's on a delay compared to things like Discord and other video games. I'd make it so that the fire bullets don't leave the infected corpses on fire for so long even when they're dead, because it limits the vision and it becomes a trivial thing sometimes. I'd also incorporate the option to mute individual player voice lines because let's just face it, some people just love to do it to either be annoying or to be funny, but sometimes you just don't want to be annoyed and sometimes they're just not as funny as they think they're being. I'd incorporate something, anything, to filter out people that just join lobbies just to team kill people. Long term, I've always just blocked people that do that, but Steam accounts are free. Left 4 Dead 2 isn't an expensive game anymore. There's free weekends, and some of us have better things to do than to just go into Left 4 Dead 2 games just to get team killed by people that just show up and leave. It's pathetic, so if there was somehow a way to incorporate it without interfering with accidental friendly fires, or without interfering with people getting the blessing to kill in safe houses or to use a defib, that'd be fantastic.
You have been hurt by somebody, that much is clear.
I'd incorporate a 64-bit update. I recently downloaded the T-Posing Garfield mod, and suddenly my cold stream and the passing crashes more than it usually does. I'd also give us a VR port for friends-only lobbies. I'm trying to punch jockeys in real life. Also, a buddy of mine wants to stand next to the spitter. Not judging him, but he's a good guy and he doesn't ask for a lot in this life, and my Bosnian brother deserves it. And a portal gun. Screw it, why not? Give me a portal gun. It will replace all the other weapons in my inventory, and it will also have the potato GLaDOS on it to be passive-aggressive to everyone around me. And ultimately, no more DDoSes. Just no more DDoSes. It's silly that it's gone on for this long. It's impressive. It's impressive that they've managed to make it go on for this long, but those are the things that I would change if I were in charge of a Left 4 Dead update or a Left 4 Dead 3. I again stress that I completely acknowledge that this game's already perfect and was carefully crafted to get the great experience that we already get from it. So changing one or two things is one thing. To make a lot of changes could create more problems than they solve. And in most cases, I don't think what I'm suggesting are mandatory things that are actually solving anything that hinders the game right now. But I think it's fun to brainstorm and discuss these things anyways, because after playing Left 4 Dead since the first game's demo, it's ingrained in my DNA, and I have a doctor's note that says that if I don't play it, I'll die. What ideas do you have, and do you agree with mine? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the future with some more Left 4 Dead 2 content and streams.
Almost there.
No! You're the real Peter Griffin? Always have been.